Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah barakatuh. Today I'm going to be doing a recitation. I'm going to be reading from a book. It's actually an old book. It's called The Songs of our Syrian Guest. Okay? But before you get all excited, this is more of a Christian book. So this is not a radical book or anything. But this book was This book is by Mr. William Allen Knight, and the decorative designs are by Mr. Charles Copeland. The Pilgrim Press, Boston, New York, Chicago. Copyright 1904, 05, 06, and 1911 reprints by William Allen Knight. Alright, so it begins. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness, for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Beside the still waters. Man trying to get his sheep out the well, I suppose. Okay. The song of our Syrian guest. Fadul Mohagabab said, our guest, our laughing as he leaned over the tea table toward two little maids, vainly trying to beguile their willing and sweetly puckered lips into pronouncing his name. Fadul Mohagabib. He repeated in syllables, pointing to the card he'd have passed them. Accent the U and drop the G's, which your little throats cannot manage. He went on kindly, while the merriment sparkled in his lustrous dark eyes, and his milk-white teeth seen through his black mustache as he laughed, added beauty to his delicate and viscous face. He was a man of winsome mind, this Syrian guest of ours, and the spirituality of his culture was as marked as the refinement of his manners. We shall long remember him for the tales told that evening of his home in Nazalta on the slope of the Syrian mountains, but the longest of all for what he said out of the memories of his youth about the shepherd dog. It was out of the shepherd's life of my country, he remarked, that there came long ago that sweetest religious song ever written, the 23rd Psalm. After the ripple of his merriment with the children had passed, as he turned to me with his face now serious and pensive, and said, Ah, so many things familiar to us are strange to you of America. Yes, I answered, and no doubt because of this, we often make mistakes which are more serious than mispronunciation of your names. He smiled pleasantly, then with earnestness said, so many things in the life of my people, the same now is in the days of old, have been woven into the words of the Bible and into the religious ideas expressed there. You of the Western world, not knowing these things as they are often misunderstood, what is written, or at least fail to correct impression from it. Tell us about some of these. I ventured with a parental glance at two listening faces. After mentioning several instances, he went on, and there is the shepherd's song. I find that it is taken among you as having two parts. The first under the figure of the shepherd life, the second turning into the scene of a banquet with the host and the guests. Oh, we have talked about that, said my lady of the teacups as she dangled the tea ball with a connoisseur's fondness. And we have even said that we wish the wonderful little psalm could have been finished in the one figure of the shepherd life. It seems to us, I added, wishing to give suitable support to my lady's rather brave declaration of our sense of literary flaw in this matchless psalm, it seems to us to lose the sweet, simple melody and to close with strange, heavy chords when it changes to a scene of banquet hospitality. Do you mean that it actually keeps the shepherd figure to the end? Certainly, good friends. With keen personal interest, I asked him to tell us how we might see it as a shepherd psalm throughout. So we listened, and he talked over the cooling teacups. It is all a simple shepherd song, he began. See how it runs through the rounds of a shepherd life, from first word to last, with softly modulated voice that had the rhythm of music and the hush of veneration in it. He quoted, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." There is the opening strain of its music. In that chord is sounded the keynote, which is never lost till the plaintive melody dies away at the song's end. And all that follows is that thought put in very varying light. I wish it were possible to reproduce here the light and his face and the interchange of tones in his mellow voice as he went on. He's talked of how the varied needs of the sheep and the many-sided care of the shepherd are pictured in the short sentences of the psalm. Each is distinct and adds something too precious to be merged and lost, he said. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures, nourishment, rest. He leadeth me beside the still waters. The scene changes, and so does the meaning. You think here of quietly flowing streams, so you get one more picture of rest, but you miss one of the finest scenes in shepherd's life, and one of the rarest blessings of the soul that is led by God. All through the day's roaming, the shepherd keeps one thing in mind. He must lead his flock to a drinking place. The refreshment of good water marks the coveted hour of all the day, the spot where it is found amid the rough, waterless hills and plains in the crowning token of the shepherd's unfailing thoughtfulness. When at last the sheep are led beside the still waters. How good it is after the dust and heat of the sheep walks. This is what the shepherd would mean by those words. He leadeth me beside the still waters. You know of rivers and brooks in the Holy Land, for their names are read many times in the Bible. But do you not think how the rivers are far from each other through rough country? And you know not how many of the brooks are called wadis by us because they are only ravines that run dry when the rainy season ends. Job says, my brethren have dealt deceitfully as a brook, as the channel of brooks that pass away. In the region where David was a shepherd, living streams are scarce indeed. For Judah borders on the south country called Negev, and that means the dry. Even in other parts where the lasting streams are, how often the shepherd finds them in gullies between broken hills. How often the banks are too dangerous for the sheep and the flow too rough. Sheep are timid and fear a current of water, as they well may, for they are easily carried downstream because of their wool. Poor things, how do they ever get a good drink? Exclaimed one of the two little maids, whose heart was always open lovingly to animals. The shepherd sees to that, doesn't he? Said the other timidly, with earnest eyes set on our guest. His face beamed with winsome relish of these tributes to his success. Yes, the sheep would indeed have a hard time finding water to drink, were it not that the shepherd sees to that. The playfulness faded from his eyes, and the shadow of manhood's years was there as he said to me, "Brother, you and I have learned how much is in that question and answer. How should we get the refreshment we need in the rough world, if the shepherd did not see to that? But he does. He does." His face brightened again as he turned to the four blue eyes across the table. "Shall I tell you how the shepherd sees to it that the sheep have a good drink every day? Listen. There are wells and fountains here and there in the regions where the flocks roam, and in some parts there are cisterns, though the sheep like the living water best. The shepherds know where their drinking places are, all through the country where streams are few. It is a fine sight to see the shepherds bring their flock beside the still waters. At some well or fountain, while the wide, silent country over which they and many other sheep have wandered spreads all around them, and the far expanse of the sky arches over them. The shepherd makes a certain sound. All his sheep lie down and are quiet. Then he fills the drinking troughs. The bubbling of the fountain, or the current, if it be by a stream, is no longer there to trouble the sheep. They can drink now undisturbed. This is the delicate meaning of that word, still. As the Hebrew word puts it, he leadeth me beside the waters of quietness. Then the waiting sheep hear a whistle or a call. They never misunderstand. They know their shepherd's voice, and they never respond to the wrong shepherd. If several flocks have come up together, and strangest of all, the sheep come up by groups, the shepherd makes them understand. So in groups he leads them until they stand beside the still waters. And oh, how they drink, with the shepherds standing near. After a pause, with a far-off look in his eyes, he said, "It is a beautiful scene, so beautiful that St. John had used it in picturing heaven." A smile broke over his face as he quoted, "The Lamb that is in the midst of the throne shall be their shepherd, and shall guide them unto fountains of waters of life." No one spoke as he sat turning his teacup. The tears started down his cast eyes. Presently he seemed to recall himself. But I must tell you of one more scene that comes to my memory whenever I read the words, "He leadeth me beside the still waters." A beautiful picture, if someone would paint it. Up in the mountains of Lebanon, where my kinsmen have long been shepherds, often there are no regular drinking places, such as the wells and fountains on the plains. But as the shepherd leads his sheep over the rough slopes, he finds many a spring and sees its rivulets noisily running down a crevice. His sheep need water. They cannot drink from the leaping little stream. What does he do? He finds a suitable turn or nook in its course. He walls it up with a little dam, and so holds the water till it forms a quiet pool. Then right there on the open hills, he leads his sheep beside the still waters, which the shepherd own, with the shepherd's own hand has stilled. I know of nothing more fit to picture the shepherd's care of souls that trust him than that scene up there on the mountainside. While our thoughts were carried away with these scenes of thirsty flocks drinking, I chanced to notice that the T-ball was again quietly at work. As we sat thinking on that picture up in the mountain, a good hand offered our guest a fresh cup. He received it with a low bow, sipped it in quiet. Then with a grateful smile, he began speaking again. He restoreth my soul. You know, he said, turning to me, that soul means the life or one's self in the Hebrew writings. Then, addressing us all, he went on. There are perilous places for the sheep on all sides, and they seem never to learn to avoid them. The shepherd must ever be on the watch, and there are private fields and sometimes gardens and vineyards here and there in the shepherd country. If a sheep stray into them and be caught, there it is forfeited to the owner of the land. So he restoreth my soul means the shepherd brings me back and rescues me from fatal and forbidden places. Restores me when wandering is the way it is put in one of our hymns. I interposed. Ah, sir, that is it exactly. He answered, restores me when wandering. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Often I have roamed through the shepherd country in my youth and seen how hard it is to choose the right path for my sheep. He leads to a precipice, another to a place where the sheep cannot find the way back. And the shepherd was always going ahead, leading them in the right paths, proud of his good name as the shepherd. Some paths are right paths, still lead through places that have deadly perils. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, is the way the psalm touches this fact in shepherd life. This way of naming the valley is very true to our country. I remember one near my home called the Valley of Robbers, and another the Ravine of the Raven. You see, the Valley of the Shadow of Death is a name drawn from my country's old custom. For thou art with me. Ah, how could more be put into few words? With the sheep, it matters not what the surroundings are, nor how great the perils and hardships. If only the shepherd is with them, they are content. There is no finer picture of the way of peace for the troubled in all the world. To show how much the presence of the shepherd counts for the welfare of the sheep, I can think of nothing better than the strange thing I now tell you. It is quite beyond the usual. Daily care on which the flock depends so fondly, but I have seen it more than once. You see the shepherd, he's got his sheep, he's carrying his sheep. Nice picture. Daily care on which the flock depends so fondly, but I have seen it more than once. Sometimes, in spite of all the care of the shepherd and his dogs, a wolf will get into the very midst of the flock. The sheep are wild with fright. They run and leap and make it impossible to get at the foe in their midst, who at that very moment may be fastening his fangs in the throat of a helpless member of the flock. But the shepherd is with them. He knows what to do even at such a time. He leaps to a rock or hillock that he may be seen and heard. Then he lifts his voice in a long call, something like a wolf's cry. Ow! Ow! On hearing this, the sheep remember the shepherd. They heed his voice, and strange to tell, the poor, timid creatures, which were helpless with the terror before, instantly rush with all their strength into a solid mass. The pressure is irresistible. The wolf is overcome. Frequently he is crushed to death, while the shepherd stands there on a rock crying, "Ow! Ow! I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." He paused, looking questioningly at one and another. "Yes," I said at last, "in all these things we are more than conquerors, through him that is loved, through him that loved us." He bowed his satisfaction in silence. "Thy rod and thy staff." This is also true to life. The double expression covers the whole round of protecting care. For the shepherds carry a crook for guiding the sheep, and a weapon suitable for defending them, the staff and the rod, one for aiding them in places of need along peaceful ways, the other for defense in perils of robbers and wild beasts. This saying describes, as only a shepherd could, how much those words mean. Thou art with me. And what shall I say of the next words? They comfort me. Ah, madam, you should see the sheep cuddle near the shepherd to understand that. A shepherd's call, ta-hoo, and the answering patter of feet as the sheep hurry to him, are fit sounds to be chosen out of the noisy world to show what comfort God gives to souls that heed his voice. And those sounds have been heard in my country this day, as they were the day the shepherd's psalm was written. He sat in silence a moment, musing as if the sounds were in his ear. With quiet animation, he lifted his thin hand and continued. Now, here is where you drop the shepherd figure and put in a banquet, and so loose the fine climax of completeness in the shepherd's care. It need not be said that we were eager listeners now, for our guest was all aglow with memories of his far-off homeland, and we felt that we were about to see new rays of light flash from his rarest gem in the song treasury of the world. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. In the same hushed voice, in which he quoted these words, he added, "Ah, to think that the shepherd's highest skill and heroism should be lost from view as the psalm begins to sing of it. And only an indoor banquet, thought of. Again, he sat little time in quiet. Then he said, the word for table here used simply means something spread out. One of the Psalms quoted the sayings, "Can God prepare a table in the wilderness?" In olden times, the table in our country was often just what you see to this day among the Arabs. Only a piece of skin or a mat or a cloth spread on the ground. That shows what is meant when the psalmist says, "Let their table become a snare, and when they are at peace, let it become a trap." Do you not see? He was thinking of this way of having meals on the ground in the open country and wished that his enemies might be caught off guard while eating and entangled among the things that they were spread before them. This is the kind of table that would be thought of in shepherd life. Why not so in a shepherd song? Now it is not exactly what the shepherd prepares for his sheep, along with finding water. He has the daily task of searching out a good and safe feeding place. He prepares a table for them, in truth, and it is nonetheless a table in the eyes because it is a spreading slope of grassy ground. All the shepherd's skill and often heroic work are called forth in this duty. It is done many a day in the presence of the sheep's enemies. There are many poisonous plants in the grass, and the shepherd must find and avoid them. The sheep will not eat many poisonous things, but there are some which they will eat. One kind of poisonous grass in particular. A cousin of mine once lost 300 sheep by a mistake in this hard task. Then there are snake holes in some kinds of ground, and if the snakes be not driven away, they bite the noses of the sheep. For this, the shepherd sometimes burns the fat of hogs along the ground. Sometimes he finds ground where moles have worked, their holes just under the surface. Snakes lie in these holes with their heads sticking up, ready to bite the grazing sheep. The shepherd knows how to drive them away as he goes along ahead of the sheep. And around the feeding ground, which the shepherd thus prepares in holes and in caves in the hillsides, there may be jackals, wolves, hyenas, and panthers, too, and the bravery and skill of the shepherd are at the highest point in closing up these dens with stones or slaying the wild beasts with his long-bladed knife. Of nothing do you hear shepherds boasting more proudly than of their achievements in this part of their care of flocks. "And now," exclaimed our guest with a beaming countenance and suppressed feeling as if pleading for recognition of the lone shepherd's bravest act of devotion to his sheep, "and now, do you not see the shepherd meaning in that quaint line? Thou preparest a table before mine in the presence of mine enemy." "Yes," I answered, "and I see that God's care of a man out in the world means far more for his good than seating him at an indoor banquet table." "But what about anointing the head with oil and the cup running over? Go on, my friend." "The rotting of the sheep." Nice picture. "Oh, but there begins the beautiful picture at the end of the day. The psalm has sung of the whole round of the day's wandering, all the sheep all the care of the shepherd. Now it closes with the last scene of the day. At the door of the sheepfold, the shepherd stands and the rodding of the sheep takes place. The shepherd turns his body to let the sheep pass. He is the door, as Christ said of himself. With his rod he holds back the sheep, while he looks them over one by one as they go into the fold. He has the horn filled with olive oil, and he has cedar tar, and he anoints a knee bruise on the rocks, or a side scratched by thorns. And here comes one that is not bruised, but is simply worn and exhausted. He bathes his face and head with the refreshing olive oil, and he takes the large two-handled cup and dips it brimming full from the water he has brought from the purpose, and he lets the weary sheep drink. There is nothing finer in the psalm than this. God's care is not for the wounded only. It is for those who are just worn and weary. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. And then, when the day is done, and the sheep are snug within the fold, what contentment, what rest under the starry sky. Then comes the thought of deepest repose and comfort. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, as they have through all the wandering of the day now ended. As the song dies away, the heart that God has watched and tended breathes this thought of peace before the roaming of the day is forgotten in sleep. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The song is hushed, and the sheep are at rest, safe in the good shepherd's fold. Do you wonder that ever since that night we have called this song the song of our Syrian guest? The end. We're going to do author's notes. Anizabalta on the slope of the Syrian mountains. When the little train has crawled up the rack and pinion railway, which zigzags from Beirut and its expanse of the sea over the snow-topped Lebanons toward Damascus, one of the small stations at which it halts among the heights is in Ain Sofar. The traveler will there notice a carriage road running southward. That road will soon lead to a spot where a flat-roofed village some 10 miles from Ain Sofar could be seen across a mountain valley. That is Ain Zahalta. An excellent watercolor drawing of this village, with the best description of scenery and life thereabout, known to me, may be found in the first 10 chapters of Ichabol's Under the Syrian Sun. One of the many, you of the Western world, not knowing these things as they are often misunderstood, is what is written. One of the many misconceptions of this sort may serve to illustrate. Only a Western viewpoint could have made the words laid him in a manger lead Christendom into its long thought of the stable as Christ's birthplace. In Palestine, one sees, as I have sought to show in No Room in the End, that a lowly home rather than a stable is indicated. An understanding which does not do violence to age-long customs of the land, and also is far happier in its suggestion, since that little book was published, I have had the satisfaction of hitting upon the following. It is my impression that the birth of Jesus actually took place in the ordinary house of some common peasant, and that the babe was laid in one of the mangers such as found in the dwellings of farmers in this region. See Thompson's The Land and the Book, verse 2, page 503. On page 98 of the same volume, this author tells how his own children were once thus accommodated. Quote, there is the shepherd song. I find that this is taken among you as having two parts. End quote, page 16. Even reading men are often unaware that authoritative writers have seen a shepherd unity throughout this psalm for centuries. The great eye of Augustine 1500 years ago saw an essential onward movement which carries the shepherd's thought on the table prepared in the presence of enemies. A spiritual deepening in that the shepherd's goodness widens the need, providing care not alone in pleasant places but also where the way becomes hard and perilous. Here are his words. Now, after the rod by which I was brought up, while a little one, and having life among the flock in the pastures, after that rod, when I began to be under the staff, thou hast prepared a table in my sight, that I should not be fed with milk as a little one, but should take food as a larger one, having been established against them that trouble me. This view can be traced in eminent writings, see notes below, down to our own time. No less a modern scholar than George Adam Smith, 4 Psalms, 1896, says that the last 2 verses are as pastoral as the first 4, and shows that the psalm does not leave the shepherd's figure at the table verse. Quote, see how it runs through the round of shepherd life from first word to last, end quote, page 17. In the Expositor, London, 1899, Armstrong Black published an elaborate article on the shepherd unity of this psalm, which is the most comprehensive treatment of the subject. I know the following, somewhat condensed, will surely be welcome here. The shepherd is as plain in the midst and last of the psalm as the first of it. The same shepherd, brave and wise in good paths of fear, and as he who sauntered with his flock beside the still waters, his sheep huddled round them, and he lead through the gloomy ravine. And what would he? There, in a place so haunted of wolf and bear, beyond that valley is the place he seeks. There, encircled by the rocks where prowl the foes of the flock, is the fair spot, nature's own table spread with food convenient. The odorous trees shedding their gum are there to refresh and alleviate, and there is the unceasing well spilling its gifts of water, and the contentment and peace of the flock seem to say, thou spreadest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Thus, the whole psalm is purely pastoral, a musical parable of a good shepherd and his sheep. Quote, in the region where David was a shepherd, living streams are scarce indeed. End quote, page 20. Mr. John Wetling, whose home has been in Jerusalem from boyhood and whose scholarly observations are known at Harvard and elsewhere in America, rode with me one day to Anfara, 2 hours of riding northeast from the city, to show me what he deems the only spot in Judah which supplies the natural setting for the imagery of this song. It is a copious and perennial spring whose streams run deep in the greenness at the bottom of a rocky gorge, the sides of which are steep, perilous, filled with caves, and still the resort of flocks. Here, he said, David must have come. His reasoning, based on the fewness of perennial streams in all the country round about, was convincing. Bethlehem lies but a few miles to the north, a few miles to the south, with no all-year waters near it save a well or two. The repeat of this psalm in the Aranfara ravine with these facts in mind, with goats and sheep seen at the openings of caves, or nibbling high on the precipices, with a wolf or a fox spied as it is run along the wild heights, with a shepherd discerning the rocks by the sound of his singing, or calling to his flock, or blowing on his reed pipe. This was the field that I understood at last, where the 23rd Psalm first woke its music in a human breast. Quote, they know their shepherd's voice. End quote. Page 23. A bare-legged young shepherd, wearing a skin bag in which he carried some bread in a sling, gave me an example of this near the village of Anata, northeast of Jerusalem. Arr, he called. Dar! The scattered sheep and the goats looked up at his throat rattle, and the nanny goat, modeled as his name Dar implies, came running to eat from his hand. I called the names which he gave us, sounding the air too. Not one so much as lifted a head. Then the shepherd laughed and shouted, Abadiah, which means black one. Straightway a black sheep came to him from among the rocks. Hanun, he cried, and a gentle creature, one easier to milk, as the name indicates, hurried to receive his caress. Katma, he called sharply. Now that names means short-eared, here came such a one, and no mistake as to its being Katma. He called his own sheep by name, and they knew not the voice of strangers. Then the shepherd laid cry, Ta-hoo! And the whole flock came pattering to him, and once more he go before him, and the sheep follow him. It was true on the Judean hills. Quote, he walls it up with a little dam, and so holds the water till it forms a quiet pool. End quote. Page 25. I saw a shepherd do this near Zibindadi, in the anti-Lebanon. He thus turned water from a swift stream into a grassy hollow, and the sheep stood in the shallow pool drinking with content. Restores me when wandering, is the way it is put in one of our hymns. Page 27. This is from Montgomery's hymn, the first stanza, which runs, the Lord is my shepherd, no want shall I know. I feed in green pastures, safe folded I rest. He leadeth my soul where the still waters flow, restores me when wandering, redeems when oppressed. Quote, the way of naming the valley is true to our country. End quote. Page 28. Everywhere in Palestine and Syria, this way of designating hills and valleys by a descriptive or commentary phrase is found. in Psalm 81:6. It is a similar designation, passing through the valley of Becca. The revised version rendering this, the valley of weeping in the margin, or balsam trees. The ravine behind Magdala on Lake Galilee is still called the Valley of Dolls, for a reason which dates back to the Savior's day, for the reader will find in my little book, Peter in the Firelight. The contemplative Old East garners impressions and memories and traditions in this way as by many other customs. Quote, shepherds carry a crook for guiding the sheep and a weapon suitable for defending them, the staff and the rod. End quote. Page 31. One mid-afternoon, near Sagrahira, 4,600 feet above sea level, in the anti-Lebanons, I saw two shepherds with black goats and sheep, one having a long staff, crooked at the end, the other a knotted club. Near me, as this note is written, is a heavy-ended, stout stick, which I brought home from the hands of a shepherd, whom I met one evening on the hillside along the west shore of Lake Galilee. When I pointed to an animal hair clotted on a knot, he explained by sign language. When I pointed to an animal hair clotted on the knot, he explained by sign language how he had used it on some wild creature. Meanwhile, quieting with his caress the staccato bleating of two stray lambs, now snug in his bosom. Sometimes this weapon is studded with nails. Beside me is also a stick bent at the end, the use of which was shown me by the young shepherd near Anata before mentioned. He motioned as if hooking a leg and drawing the sheep. The staff is sometimes straight, a climbing stick, as common among shepherds as the goad among plowmen. Often it is merely a short scalping, so to cut as to get the bend of the root, for fuller growth is scarce indeed now in Palestine. But near Bethlehem I saw an old shepherd carrying a long, well-rounded crook, such as had been made familiar in Christian art. The double significance indicated in the psalm by the plural, they comfort me, is too precious to be lost sight of. The Ivanhoe, chapter 36, there is an interesting instance of the double significance when the Knight Templars return from Palestine speaks as of one as needing rather the support of the staff than strokes of the rod. The word for the table here used simply means something spread out, page 33. Geniuses in the Hebrew lexicon also define it and refer to this verse of our psalm together with Psalm 78:19. Psalm 78 verse 19, can God, quote, can God prepare a table in the wilderness? Quote, end quote. Quote, this is the kind of table that would be thought of in shepherd life. Why not in a shepherd song? End quote. Pages 33-4. In the Speculator under the date of Saturday, the July 26, 1712, in this paper number 441, Joseph Addison wrote of the benefits of trusting reliance on God. He closes with a translation of the 23rd Psalm, quote, which is a kind of pastoral hymn and filled with those allusions which are usual in that kind of writing, end quote. It begins, the Lord is my pasture, shall I prepare, and feed me with a shepherd's care. At the table verse, the rendering is, quote, though in a bare and rugged way, through devious lonely wilds I stray, thy bounty shall my pains beguile. The barren wild wilderness shall smile, with sudden green and herbage crowned, and streams shall murmur all around. End quote. Clearly, Addison thought of the table spread in the wilderness as the feeding place of the sheep. Sudden greens and herbage. In John Bryant's A Divine Pastoral, some 50 years later, a similar view is found. Quote, he has the horn filled with olive oil and has cedar tar, etc. End quote. Page 37. In a letterhead, SS Stracona at sea off Labrador coast, thick fog, end quote. Dr. W.T. Greenfell once wrote that this passage specially pleased him and added words about his joys as a physician. A London antiquarian wrote that he had verified all points in this narrative but this, and asked what authentication could I send him. Passing over all book references, let me record here only the following. One day, as we journeyed in the Syrian mountains near Anzenhelta, I asked our dragoman about the various uses of olive oil among his people. Judge of my delight as the words from his lips were written in my notebook. It is a great medicine with us. Also, you know when our Lord Jesus Christ gave that parable, he said, pouring in oil in wine for cleansing, oil for healing. Quote, safe in the shepherd's fold. Page 39. Is there scholarly warrant for carrying the shepherd thought of a fold onto the house at the close of the psalm? When Addison wrote his delightful stanzas, there were at least two great folio works by eminent scholars to support his rendering, both published shortly before his birth in 1672. One was written by Hugo Grotius, the other by Henry Hammond of Oxford. The latter ends his paraphrase thus, quote, to crown all this, thou shalt enfold me at last in the best of sheep's coats, that place of equal purity and safety, where no ravenous beast can come, there shall I rest, and there abide forever. In a small leather-bound book bearing the date 1843, which I have long treasured, are stanzas beginning, quote, my shepherd's name is love, end quote. They were written by Edwin F. Hatfield, long eminent in America. The last stanza runs, quote, when raging foes surround, my comforts still abound. I breathe a fragrant air and feed on sweetest fare. Thus in thy fold, when warm and old, I dwell secure beneath thy care. They gain from this view. The vital gain from this story's interpretation seems to me twofold and really precious. First, the idea of glorifying over enemies who have to gaze impotently on the honors paid a favorite at a banquet must be harsh note utterly discordant in a song so sweet. The one human flaw in a gem divinely pure. To keep the shepherd's imagery secures the psalm itself, a literary simplicity and a quiet heightening of effect. within that simplicity, quite too fine to lose, and it saves us from blurring its picture of spiritual serenity at the point of deepest beauty. But for men in their troubled world life, it does far more than to secure the highest literary charm. It distinctly sounds the notes of peace where men often cease to hear them. It gathers up the music and the message of the psalm, as it were, into a deep harmony. In the first three verses, there are food, refreshments, rest, guidance, yet there all is in pleasant places. It is a simple melody, but at the words, yea, though, a second movement opens, deeper, fuller. Not a melody, but a harmony swells through the last three verses. Here, once more is guidance, but now it is through a dark valley where perils are and protection is consummation. Here is food, but now it is in the wilds where enemies prowl and lurk with savage eyes. Here is refreshment, but now it is with alleviating oil and ministering cup amid hard places. And here too is rest, but now it finds completeness in the shepherd's shelter after the long day's roaming. Nothing that is in the forepart of the psalm is lacking, even in the pleasant places are left behind and hardships and perils abound. This is the full glory of what the good shepherd is to his sheep. He rises to the situation, measures up to all emergencies of need. Herein is the height of his goodness. It goes beyond all that he could be to them in the pleasant, easy days. When at last the psalm sings, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. That word all is the high full tone note, sounding out the meanings of the whole psalm, all the days. Days when pastures were green and waters still. Days when we went through dark places in shadow and peril. Days when we were far out of the world in life's imperative quests, enduring hardships and beset by enemies. All the days of my life. This psalm is divine. Lo, I am with you always, through all the days, sounding back from the heart of man. The end. This is the song of our Syrian guest. Okay. Written by William Allen Knight. And I just would like to say just a quick quote at the end. And one general lesson, I suppose, from this story would definitely be that we shouldn't underestimate the job of a shepherd. Many people, I suppose, we can easily get caught in the infatuation of being a shepherd and can tend to think that just reading a psalm or reading the Bible or just giving people direction is all that a shepherd does. I think what I've learned from this book is that being a shepherd is a lot more work and is more responsibility than meets the eye. The shepherd, for one, has to be trained by another shepherd. Otherwise, he wouldn't know what to do. And there's a whole host of knowledge that the shepherd has to have about not just his sheep and how they fare, but also about the dangers out here. And these are also parables, because we can talk about an actual shepherd with sheep, but these sheep are also the people who come to for guidance. If you own a church or if you're part of a Bible study group and you're a declared shepherd or whatever. I'm not a declared shepherd, by the way, but it's also a metaphysical shepherd, and he's talking about the spiritual guidance of a people who need guidance, because people can be very timid and scared in their ignorance, and they can flock about. So the shepherd usually would stand out above or would stand apart from most of he would stand apart from the average person, in that he would have to have a certain character set about him. And so we all know that sometimes we can be blessed with certain characters, and sometimes characters can be developed. And that's one of the mercies of God, is that he doesn't just fix us to one personality type. Anybody can become a shepherd if that's their calling and they're willing to work at it, and they're willing to handle all the responsibilities that come with being a shepherd. So those are just some things I wanted to say, and I hope you enjoyed this reading. Inshallah, I'll read you guys another book. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah barakatuh. This is Muhsin Abdin reading songs from our Syrian guests. 23rd Psalm, breakdown of the shepherd. Lord is my shepherd. Amen.